historic Brattonsville. I'm an interpreter here, and thank you for joining us for another Time Travel Tuesday. This week, we will be meeting some of the descendants from historic Brattonsville. These are the descendants of the people who were enslaved here, and they'll be sharing the stories of their families. First, we'll have Mr. Winston Bagley, and then we'll have Mr. Wally Cathcart following him.
My name is Winston Bagley, and I live in Gastonia, North Carolina now. I am a descendant of Sam Smith, and Sam was a carpenter on the grounds here. He did not originally start out as a slave here at Brattonsville, but as it turns out, he was his owner actually owed Dr. Bratton some money, and we did find the records to show that because he was unable to pay that debt within a 1-year period, that Dr. Bratton, became owner of Sam. His nickname was Samson, and as him coming to Brattonsville would have been a huge benefit, primarily because he was a skilled carpenter. And skilled carpenters were able to make not only farm tools, but of course tools for log cabins, etc. Sam was born back in 1818. It just makes sense to believe that he developed most of his skills from his work with Thomas Hyde Smith. Coming to Brattonsville, would have been probably a disparaging kind of experience for him because he obviously wasn't born here. But the long and the short of it is, I am a descendant of Amy and Sam Smith. His nickname again was Samson. His wife, Amy, I mentioned. His last daughter's name was Adeline, and Adeline was my great grandmother. And her husband, Josephus Cassell. And then my grandmother, Sally, was the youngest of the girls. My mother, Amy, was born from Sally. And it's a long, short story from there. But of course, it kind of takes us back to, my descendancy. The truth of that particular learning experience was, I would say, difficult, primarily because my parents didn't like, at least my mom, didn't like talking about slavery. And, if that was a topic that came up, it was not something that she wanted as part of the dinner or any kind of discussion that we had at home. So I think the frustration of a lot of shares, as a matter of fact, I think from talking to some of the other individuals who had ancestors here, they had that common experience where the parents didn't really want to talk about slavery at home. But even though they didn't talk about it, we had roots back here. We would come and visit who we called our Aunt Ruth, who lived not too far from here. The area was common to us, but at that time, I had never seen the plantation in and of itself and didn't really know much about the history, again, as I said earlier, because my parents, my mom especially, didn't want us talking about it. They didn't want to hear it. And I think that was because of the stigma, the embarrassment of slavery. But Ruth was able to kind of make the connections, fill in the blanks, and she was more the family historian, and she would tell us and make up, not make up stuff, but fill in the details for who was who and what happened. And as it turns out, that after the emancipation, she was explaining to us that my Uncle John, who was the youngest son of Adeline and Josephus, pretty much had the homestead, and due to some, I guess, not knowing the tax system and understanding the tax system, lost the acreage that had been given to them as a result of being slaves on the plantation. And because they didn't understand that you had to pay taxes and you had to do certain things to be able to keep property like that. And it's awesome to be able to come back and know that your ancestors, my great-great-grandfather and his wife raised children here. And to be able to go into some of the slave cabins and actually see, after learning that they made the bricks that they used to build the slave cabins here, it was an awesome experience to actually be able to look at some of those bricks and see slave fingerprints, and to just be able to reminisce, and knowing that you didn't know whose fingerprints they are had nothing to do with how awesome it felt just to be able to look at that. I mean, that was just unbelievable for me. But to actually be able to pull some of the loose ends together, my great-great-grandparents, Amy and Sam, are buried up here at McConnell's. And I was able to find their headstone. When I made that discovery, I couldn't move. It was an awesome experience for me, because I know a lot of people who pretty much grew up in this area knew their parents were buried either at McConnell's, we call it Big Mount Zion, but at that particular church, or at the Presbyterian church. I had an opportunity to visit even that particular church and knew of McConnell's, just didn't know that my ancestors were affiliated with that particular church, except for, again, the kinds of things that my Aunt Ruth would share with us. But having the opportunity as a child to kind of learn some of this would have been even more impactful to me. It's just that most of this I didn't know about or didn't learn about until I was a full-fledged adult with a family of my own. So, and then kind of going back from there to pull all the pieces together of people and things that you've heard. And then Ancestry.com has been a tremendous resource for me, because I've been able to kind of go back through and pull all of the details together. I wish I was like some of the other descendants who had pictures. Now, I do have a few pictures. I have pictures of my great-grandmother, but I don't have pictures of Sam and Amy. I do have some pictures of like their grave site and that kind of stuff. But it's regrettable that we didn't necessarily have people who had those resources, and people who had the monetary means to kind of have pictures taken and that kinds of thing, the way we take for granted today. Just stick to it. Don't give up. Just recognize that, that old scripture that says the race is given not to the swift or the strong, but to he that endureth until the end. Just knowing that your longevity, your patience will make all the difference. And once you find anybody that may have a little information about the kinds of things that you're interested in knowing, you use that person to kind of build off and find other possibilities in terms of people who can share knowledge. But Ancestry, as I said earlier, has been a tremendous resource, because they kept track of all the census data. And I've been able to go back into the early 1700s, even since By the Sweat of Our Brow, which is the program that's held here each year, just to take a look at ancestors that would have preceded my great-great-grandfather and grandmother, Sam and Amy. But when it comes down to trying to pull all the bits and pieces, you've got just so many people that would have been offspring from one generation to the next. And it makes it a slow process. Again, just kind of staying with it and knowing that if you do, you'll gradually put it together, and you may not even see it coming together until after you really just slow down and go back and review your findings. And for me, it wasn't so difficult keeping up with the kids for Sam and Amy, or the kids that my great grandmother had with Adeline, or any of their siblings. It was difficult for me to go beyond, because I couldn't find information about Sam being on another farm or plantation. But we did find out that there were some other Bagleys. My last name now is Bagley, that were on a plantation that was also affiliated with the Brattons in Winsboro, South Carolina. And that's where my paternal grandparents were from. And once I found that out, it really opened some additional doors. So again, just use the resources that you know about, and even hints from resources that other people would share with you. Sometimes you'll get frustrated with the ancestry experience, but it's great to know that you have that as a resource, because it'll open a lot of doors, and it will send you hints once you put information in about a person that is in your lineage. For me, this place, Brattonsville, I learn something about it every time I come down to visit, and I don't think I can take it for granted, but I'm trying to get that same kind of enthusiasm that I have about it instilled in other families. And my son now lives out in Dallas, Texas, so because it was so late for me to really kind of get my roots implanted and finding out more information, it's more difficult to get him involved. But I'm going to make sure that one way or the other that he has access to my journey through ancestry and through some of the other connections that I've had, because there's several websites out there that you can use above and beyond ancestry that will help you find relatives from the past. And again, I do have a couple of nephews and nieces that I think will kind of help continue and carry that torch. But that's one of the challenges there, to know that if you can pass this information along to someone else, that they can maybe build on it and build on it and build on it, and that's what it's all about. And I'd like to see if we can, fine-tune and detail that trail, that historical trail for my family, without necessarily having somebody throw something in there that hadn't been researched well enough to know that it's real.
I'm Wally Cathcart. I'm from Rock Hill, South Carolina. I now live here about 3 miles from where we are today. I learned about the Brattonsville from my parents, grandparents. I grew up in this area my first 18 years of my life before I left. And I knew that my grandmother, Fanny Crawford Cathcart, was born here in 1868. Growing up, I didn't have much understanding other than that, because my parents' generation didn't discuss the issue of slavery. They didn't talk that much about it. So consequently, I wasn't able to get a lot of in-depth information about this plantation. It was just called the old Bratton Place. During my time, it was rather abandoned. It was growing up, but there was always a very negative connotation that we heard about it. One of the most things that stood out with me about my grandmother, she seemed to have been related to everybody in the community. And my brother and I, my oldest brother Crawford, and I, he's a year and a half older than me, so we had more intact contact with her because we knew and got to know her personally before she passed. She was related to everybody, and her name was Fanny, and he was her Aunt Fanny, her cousin Fanny. And when I got involved with Brattonville and started to do my research here and got to understand that there was practically 140 some enslaved people here, and so their ancestors or their descendants were left scattered in this area. And my grandmother being very light complexion, and then her mother being mulatto, and then having two children that were fathered by the Bratton men. So there were a lot of people in this area who were either were related because of that. So that's one thing that stood out about me. That was why she was related to so many people in this area. I would advise persons like that to start to do research. The first thing you can look into the census report, because the 1870 was the first time that the enslaved were included on the census. Find out from the elders in your family, and trace back from your grandmother if you know, and start to do your research. And you have archives and records that you can start to research. Go back and find out as much about your parents as you can, and by all means, ask questions of the elders in your family and start to move backward. If you live in this area here, which is York County, York has a wonderful place, the McClellan Center, and it's an archive, and they have a staff there that is really, really good at helping you and assisting you, because they're so, I guess, trained in this on the subject. They can help you find the names that you're looking for of your ancestors. By all means, visit that. I highly recommend the McClellan Center to anyone wanting to find out about their ancestry. Go there, and while you got ancestry.com that you can go to, but start where you are, and once you know the surnames of your family, your grandmother and grandfather, take those names and trace them. Get the census report and go from there. Getting involved here at this plantation in Brattonsville, I would say about 2006 or something, I become involved with By the Sweat of Our Brow. And from there, I have been, I guess you say, researching and finding out that there were so many of us in the area, because the descendants that we have accumulated now is about, I would say, about 8 families. And we're basically related. The Smiths, the Thompsons, Crawfords, these are to name a few. I'm sure there are more, because this was such a large plantation, and in its zenith, at its height, something like 6,000 acres. So there are a lot of descendants in this area, and we are still finding more as we are going along. More and more families are coming aboard, and the interest is intensifying now, and I'm happy to hear that. And I want to say to African Americans, we're going to get over the phobia and the stigma of what we were conditioned to view slavery. And I feel, in a sense, that is blaming our ancestors, and when they were not really guilty of anything except being enslaved. And I think we have a duty and responsibility to them. The fact that we are still here is a testament and honor to them, that they survived the atrocities of that time. So we should honor them and be highly, respectful of them for surviving, and that we can enjoy the things that they never got a chance to enjoy, because they looked down through the generations and hope that whatever hope or aspiration they had to channel it to their future, education and whatever you might wish that we have achieved. So we do have a great responsibility, and I do feel that if many of our young people understood that they're just not individuals, you represent something. And I feel when you have that kind of understanding, what you represent, you're standing on the shoulders of those who went before you, it makes you think differently, and you feel differently. You see a need to take advantage of whatever opportunity that you have before you, education or otherwise.
Thank you again for joining us for this week's Time Travel Tuesday and meeting the Descendants. We hope that you join us again next week to watch the James Williams story and the brick house restoration.